we have for basic and current practices is Taylor Wilson from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Taylor is economist from the Division of Consumer Expenditure Surveys at BLS, and he currently works in a branch of information and analysis and deals with the public directly, listening to their concerns while using government data and helping them through any problems they may have. He's been working on metadata-related problems since coming to the Bureau in June 2015, and is excited to serve public interest through accessible metadata and efficient dissemination practices.
Everybody, a few folks a little bit about the discovery of data. I just wanted to mention, for those who didn't know, that Google released very, very recently, within the last few weeks, a data set search specifically for data sets. So if you want to go on there at some point and look for your data sets from your agency, you can see how discoverable you really are. So I am here to talk about the implementation of the DDI framework for the consumer expenditure surveys here at the BLS. And we've been working really closely with Dan Gilman over here on doing this because we think that the DDI initiative is the DDI is really, really important for making our dissemination practices more streamlined and accessible to our user base. So this is the stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the challenges in the survey that led us to this conclusion that our metadata were either non-existent or in disrepair, so we needed to do something in order to start collecting it all together. The use of the word collect is operative here, as we're using a software called Collectica to help us document our data. I'm going to talk about how DDI works with the Consumer Expenditure Survey, what we've done with the implementation to date, some technical requirements that we ran into that is something to think about if you want to try and do something like this for your survey, and what we plan on doing going forward. So the first bit is this survey challenges. And so the Consumer Expenditure Surveys, if you're not aware, has one of the oldest operating programs of household surveys out there. It's been in continuous operation in some context since 1888. Now, we have data stored on servers here at the BLS going back to 1981. There's a massive amounts of data. There are 2 surveys, an interview and a diary, that at the end of the processing, they get combined into final estimates. So there's lots of things going on, 60 data sets, 1,800 variables, 10 data sets, 1,600 expenditure items, and in addition to that, there are 70 or so data processing jobs or edits that happen across our process to the data from collection to dissemination. So you can imagine how difficult it might be to describe to an end user where did the data come from? what happened to how old are you to the variable that you're looking at in the microdata at the end of the process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So in keeping with everybody else's trope of displaying something that's non-readable and needlessly complex, I am going to do that also. So this is our complete process from beginning to end, color-coded. I made this all by myself as part, not really, there's a team behind me. I made this with a team, and we actually went through the beginning all the way to public release and said, what is everything that we do to the data from beginning to end, and we color-coded it based on phases. And we said we need to really track the data through every single one of these things in order to truly be successful in telling the public what happened from sample collection all the way to the public release. So it's one survey, or really 2 surveys if you count the diary and the interviews separately, and there's 2 dimensions. So there's this time dimension, this continuous operation of the data across time. We're documenting back from when it's publicly available to the users, and that's 1996 is when the public use microdata is available to everybody. But there is data theoretically that goes back to 1888 in a decennial format at first, and then a continuous yearly format. And then in each of those years, there are 4 processing phases, 3 of which happen here at the BLS, and 1 of which that happens at the Census Bureau. So for us, we're going to be documenting from when we get the data all the way up until when it is disseminated in the 4th phase. and then across each year. So that's kind of what the complexity here that DDI is supposed to help us solve. So I won't spend too much time on this since we've heard about all these things a lot so far, but we're leveraging this idea of this toolbox framework that DDI has, so we can use their objects to help us describe the things that happen through processing and the things that happen through our yearly changes. Who uses DDI? Well, it is represented at a lot of statistical agencies globally, and I like to remind people that when we get in line with the way that we document our data with some of these other foreign statistical agencies, it facilitates communication, and that's really important because a lot of them do household budget surveys as well, and we want to know, okay, is our household budget survey, is our consumer expenditure survey related to any of them, and if it is, in what way at a conceptual level. So our current problem is there's fragmentations across the subsystem. Subsystem 1 doesn't talk to subsystem 2, which doesn't talk to subsystem 3. They sort of hand off the data, and nobody in one subsystem really knows what happens in the other subsystem. Somebody talked about siloing here before. It's the exact same problem, as you might imagine, across every federal agency. So metadata exists in different folders and forms for different survey subsystems. If I want to answer a question, it takes me a very long time to find that information internally. I'm not even talking about going out and trying to explain it to a user. First, I have to learn it, and that often takes a long time for this. There's a lot of different points where analysts will do manual inputs or alterations as a result of a process that may be decades old. So there is a need across all these subsystems to develop a way of thinking about the data in a continuous framework from the beginning to the end. The other thing is that we have these two surveys in the same concept that's attempting to be captured in both surveys. So we may capture something like clothing in the interview and the diary. We may capture something in the diary that is unique to the diary. We may capture something in the interview that is unique to the interview. And at the end, we want to provide a complete picture of consumer expenditures, and that requires data from both surveys to be integrated at the end of the process. Data are integrated at the end, and creating perfect interoperability between the surveys would be ideal, though I think impossible for some of the reasons that this gentleman mentioned over here about the context is different if you're filling out a diary versus being approached in the interview, even if it's the same thing you're trying to capture. Really, there's going to be differences there. So the ideal solution that we would want to do is to implement DDI for the entire process. And Dan mentioned early on that DDI can help us document those processing pipelines that are so prevalent throughout our system. And we would want to be able to cohesively describe every step from the survey question all the way until the output of the variable in the public use microdata. So this involves tracking each process within the steps. Now, one of the things that is interesting here, that big flow chart that I showed you was an effort on the part of the team, the DDI team here at BLS, to understand our own process. It was an exercise in navel-gazing for the purpose of being able to know how to approach this problem from the outset. The problem is that, so I'm the new team lead of that team because the old team lead left. And all of the resources that we put into that human capital development of understanding our own process, when people leave, they either quit, get promoted, or whatever, all that goes away instantaneously. So it's a continuity of operations problem because when people leave, what they leave behind are the things that they knew where they were. They know where the filters, they know where the documentation is. When they're gone, I don't know where any of it is. So if you are able to develop a reasonable system for accessing the metadata consistently and cohesively across the phases and across time, you can answer those questions without having to have that flowchart memorized through days and days of study. And you want to be able to do that for a survey program that is important to developing the cost weights for the CPI. That's stuff to do. And if we forget how we do things, or we're unable to discover how we do our own processes, then we can't answer the questions that the CPI might have in a way that is useful to them. So unfortunately, that ideal solution isn't going to happen right now. It's difficult to get everybody on board. I think somebody talked about earlier how there's pushback and ownership and, silos and these sorts of things. So what we decided to do was be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, as we're all, and that is accessible to the public so that they can understand the changes in the data for the data that they are able to access. So that's the public use microdata. My job in the CE primarily is to respond to these user questions. When they come in and say, I'm doing this model, I've got this data set, I don't know what this variable is, how do I work with it? And I talk to them and go through this process with them. So I get a pulse, really, for what our users are doing with our data, and we can then try and build a system with metadata involved that makes it so answering those questions is not only easier for me, but something that maybe they wouldn't have to call me to do anymore if they had a system that was accessible. So one of the things that they would want to know is what question generated the data that I'm looking at. That's a really common thing. If I look at the survey questionnaire, how do I get to variable at the end? So what we're trying to do is say, okay, we're going to link the question to the variable. Maybe there are 6 questions in the questionnaire that lead in some combination through that big process to one final data point at the end of the survey. At least we can tell them that. So that's what the interim solution is here. We're not going to describe how those 6 questions changed and morphed and did all of the things in processing inside of the black box. That's the ideal solution. That's this one. But since we can't do that, we're just going to say that these 6 questions point to this variable at the end so the user knows what they're looking at and what generated those questions, even if they don't know exactly how it was generated. So what did we do? How did we do this? So one of the things we wanted to be able to do for these users was to be able to do keyword searches for things that gave you best possible outcomes. So if I was interested in education, for example, I would type in the word education, and it would show me the things in the survey that were relevant to education in an order of importance, I guess is something you could say. Display the life cycle of the variable. Ideally, the life cycle goes through every process that variable goes through. When we say life cycle here, I really mean from question to microdata variable. And I want to be able to query those relationships. I want to be able to click on that question and see all of the microdata variables that are created as a result of that question being asked in some form or another. And then I want to see what the changes of that variable is across time. So one of the things I get is somebody will call and say, I am building a time series of these consumer expenditures across all these years, and for some reason your code for education is not the same in 1996 as it is in 2005. And for me to answer that question now, I would have to open every single PDF dictionary from every single year and compare the codes manually to be able to tell that user when it changed. It would be a lot better if they could type in the word education and see the code set and then see the visual break when that code set changed, when the survey question was redesigned. And the last thing is to display and link to reference documents. Internally, what I want that to be is a link to our own requirements. I want to be able to look at the requirement internally to say, this is what this process is meant to do, this is the input, this is the output, and this is how that variable changed. What I want the user to be able to do is click on the variable and understand where it came from the things that they are able to view as public users of the data. The last thing is we're actually moving our questionnaire development into this framework as well, because DDI has a robust infrastructure for capturing questions. So there's a separate team at our survey program that is working to create a question bank of all the questions across all of the years. And we want to map those questions as they existed in a certain time state across the entire process. So that's another thing that's going on. I'll show you a little bit of all of this. So I'm actually going to show you the prototype that we made so you can actually look at what we did to accomplish some of these goals. The prototype is for 4 questions. We did 4 questions out of all the questions we did, and we mapped those questions to a bunch of variables at the end of the day. I think it was health insurance is the one. So this is what it looks like, the actual interface. And so a public user, and it's the aesthetics, of course, can be improved. I made them add the star in the upper left-hand corner, so it looks more legitimate. But so in general, this is the interface that a user might work with. Okay, and you see that there's these questions down here, and series. So series is interview and diary, the 2 surveys. We've put 8 questions into the system. You can imagine this would say however many questions you were interested in. And then so these quick links let you then go to certain things that you want to put in here. These quick links are placed there just for our presentation that we gave to internally to show some things that were relevant. These quick links would be customizable to whatever you were interested in. So here's what I mean. So there's a certain variable in our data set that is unhelpfully named called QHI3MCX, and that is health insurance payments. Isn't that great? So what I want to know is those health insurance payments, how do they exist in each of the subsystems, and how do they exist across each of the years? Now, DDI has a very useful tool called the represented variable that says that this variable changed at some point, but it's still intended to capture the same idea. So you can see that QHI3MCX is the same in 2012 and 2013 at the second level down. So that is still the same idea. However, at the very base level, there maybe have been a code change, a question, text change, something like that you'll want to capture, even though that question is intended to capture the same conceptual idea. So this is what I was referencing there. Now, if you go here to these conceptual variables, you can see that there's this search box that we really wanted to use. So if you type in education, it sorts it here by relevance. So it says, okay, what is the best match? And there's an algorithm that goes through and determines what the best match is for a certain search that you put in here. And you can change relevance to other subsets of things that you're interested in. And then when you click on it, it will give you really anything you want to put here. So this is just a default graph that might go in here. So these are all the codes and what their percentages were in a year and quarter combination. But you could make this graph whatever you wanted is the basic idea. So if I click this code comparison, I can then see what those codes are kind of deep down. So you'll notice here that in phase 1 and phase 2, everything is the same. You see they're all nicely lined up. And then when we get to those are all public use microdata files, MEMI, all of those are all public use microdata files. And you notice that some of them are the same, but where did all of those other codes go? So this represents what I'm talking about, a change in processing. The code set was changed from the collection of the data to the output of the data in the public use files. So you'll notice here, okay, 12th grade, no diploma. Keep that in your head. Down here in the public use microdata, we call it 12th grade, no degree. So it's a different thing, same code, but we changed the code set across this. It gets even worse than that. If you look over here, you see there's lots of disjointed code sets that come through that are in some files but not in others. And one of the most egregious errors, I think, is that the only difference between these is the location of the parenthetical. So if you're trying to do a machine-readable format where somebody goes in and says, okay, is this code set the same as the previous year, the machine is going to tell you it's not. And that's not good. So what we want to do is be able to use this system as a method of navel gazing, because this tells us immediately where there are problems. I don't have to visually examine the data in order to determine where our metadata has become inconsistent. I can then actually look at this and it'll tell me what all the disjoints and the breaks are. The questionnaire looks a little bit like this. So if this is the interface, it's in beta. So we're working with the developers of Collectica Questionnaire as we're putting our questionnaire in, what things we would like to see so that they can tailor it towards what we're trying to do. And so you can add a question that has all of the options in here, and it's built with DDI in mind. So all the fields are related to the DDI framework. And the nice part is it can be exported and imported with different types of code. So if we are given Blaze code from Census, we can take that Blaze code and generate the questionnaire that way if we want to input data from some other place. And then we can export it in different ways. If we want to create a questionnaire that's readable by a user, we can do it through this process. This is one of the drawbacks right now. I just wanted to point out, we ask a lot of grid questions in our survey, and that's one of the things that we need that they need to develop a better system on. So this is what I meant about that feedback loop with the developers. We're inputting things into their system, and we're seeing where it breaks. So we can then tell them, hey, we need a better way to display grid questions. We need a better way to put these things in here. So we came up with a workaround, which I won't go into detail because I want to be respectful of your time. But if you have questions about these sorts of things, feel free to give me a call. Some things I want to mention are the technical requirements around this, and whether or not your particular office has the resources able to meet these technical requirements is really variable. So I just wanted to tell you what we had to go through so that you can decide for yourselves whether or not that's something worthwhile. So in order to run the Collectica system, you need SQL Server in some form or another. You could use PostgreSQL, which is a open source, but the BLS doesn't like open source things. As one of the other presenters pointed out, that's something we really should be taking advantage of. But so we had to buy SQL Server, and then the programmers that we're working with, or the developers, use C# and Software Developers Kit to sort of work with all these things. So we outsourced a lot of this work to them, and they've been producing that prototype that you saw was all done through their Software Developers Kit for their portal that they have. So it's something that you either will have to train your staff on or be able to hire somebody who knows how to do these things. What are we doing going forward? In the short term, we are currently setting up a server internally at BLS. The prototype was made on Collectica's server using public use data. We want to be able to house this system in-house in the BLS. We don't want to have it be externally hosted. So we're in the process of setting that up right now, and the team is placing as much within scope metadata as possible into machine-readable formats. So we're going through all these PDFs and all these Excel spreadsheets that are disjointed, and we're trying to place them in a way that we can feed it into this ingester program so that it populates the server with these DDI appropriate terminologies and organization. In the long term, right now our processing systems are being redesigned. So there's a separate team that is rebuilding our processing systems from the ground up. Once that's done, we want to be able to document that system in Collectica. So when they finish saying we're going to change the way that all that flowchart works, we want to be able to say, okay, we can take what you've done, put it into the DDI framework, and then we will be able to tell a user, whether it's an internal stakeholder like somebody in one of the other phases, how it's different from previously, or even an external user saying, oh, we don't do this process anymore, we don't do this kind of imputation for this, or something like that. So in the long term, we would want to roll out that public-facing portal to make the user experience more efficient and effective. So we want them to be able to access that interface that I showed you that is identifying problems to us in a way that actually communicates information to them in a way that's effective and efficient, so they don't have to ask me or have to look through PDFs on their own throughout our website. So that's my contact information, and you can email the entire team or you can email me. Somebody would love to talk to you. I'm sure everybody on the team is very personable. So if you have any questions for me now, I'm happy to take them.